for comma use, okay? And we went over when to use commas, what you should do with them, and how to punctuate with them properly, right? So this week, we're going to start by going over misuses of commas, okay? Things we frequently do using commas that cause grammatic errors. So we're going to start there. Okay, and then we're going to move on to the parts of speech, guys. It is so critical to be able to name the parts of speech, okay? And if some of you are thinking it will feel a bit basic to go over parts of speech, we are going to go over more than adjectives, verbs, and nouns, okay? That's what we think of when we hear part of speech, okay? But there are a series of other ones as well, like prepositions and conjunctions, that I want to go over so that way when we move on to slightly more elevated grammar rules, then you guys will have the right vocabulary, okay? So if I say there's a preposition here or a pronoun, you'll be comfortable with that and know exactly what it was. All right, so let's get started, okay? And today we're going to try something new, the PowerPoint on the screen. So let's see how this goes, guys. Okay, guys, so let's get started with comma misuses, okay? So the first misuse we're going to go over, okay, commas should never be placed between compound subjects and compound objects, okay? So a compound subject, guys, this consists of two nouns joined by the word and, okay? So we should never put a comma between these two nouns, okay? So let's look at an example, and it should sound slightly awkward when we read it with the comma. Michael Jordan and LeBron James are two of the most famous basketball players in NBA history, okay? So guys, the comma after Michael Jordan does not belong. That's a single subject, okay? The subject is both of these basketball players. So a comma does not belong here, okay? Right? And then example 2, Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly are a dynamic comedy duo in the movie Step Brothers, okay? So additionally, guys, these are what make us feel like we need a comma. So if we said William Shakespeare wrote over 40 plays, it's unlikely that you're going to put a comma between the sentence's subject and the sentence's verb. However, if you have kind of it feels like a complex introductory statement, right? Okay. We sometimes feel like we want to put a comma after it. So instead of William Shakespeare, we made the subject more complex. He's the famous playwright, William Shakespeare. Okay, remember, no matter how complex the subject gets, whether it's compound or you're modifying it in some way, like the second example here, right, that you still don't put that comma there. Just because the subject is complex doesn't mean that we should separate the subject from the verb with a comma. Okay, so the fix below, the famous playwright William Shakespeare wrote over 40 plays and 154 sonnets. Okay, so guys, what I want you to take note of is the kind of sentences you might construct that will cause these errors. Okay, so the more complex your writing is, the more details you put in it, this is where the urge to put commas in comes from. Okay. So another misuse of commas before or after prepositions, guys. There's almost never going to be a comma before or after prepositions. They just don't belong, okay? And we'll go over prepositions again today, but these words tell you where or when something is happening. They alter the object, okay? So please be sure to sign your name on the line after you read the contract, okay? So here's our example of the error, guys. Okay, it doesn't belong before that preposition on. It also wouldn't belong after it. Okay, your name on, comma, the line after you read the contract. Neither of those would belong. Okay, so then there's our fix. Be sure to sign your name on the line after you read the contract. Okay. I prefer to do my homework in the library. Okay. So again, this isn't the same type of example, but the comma is after the preposition. Either of these, right, belong, guys. We shouldn't have the commas. And they make the sentences sound awkward and the pauses not natural. Okay. Our cat frequently hides under the couch. Okay, so we shouldn't have it, right, even with the verb in there. we need to make sure there are no commas surrounding prepositions. Okay, our cat frequently hides under the couch. Between adjectives and nouns. Okay, so last week, guys, we did talk about appropriately putting commas between two adjectives. Remember, their order has to be reversible. Okay, so when the adjectives are attached to the subject, you can't put the comma in between them, right? Like a blow-up bed or a flat screen TV. Okay, but when it comes to adjectives and the nouns they are describing, we don't want to put commas in between them, okay, unless there are multiple adjectives. Okay. Located in California, NASA is a national organization that focuses on space travel and aeronautic research. Okay, guys, so that pause after national should have felt awkward. Okay. You shouldn't have any commas between the modifiers and the nouns they modify. Located in California, NASA is a national organization that focuses on space travel and aeronautic research. Let's look at another example. The local football team was known for having the best record in their league. Okay, so again, this pause is awkward and it's not necessary, right? It's an error to have these. Okay, so do we have any questions so far? Let me just look into the chat, guys, to make sure. I'm not seeing any, but since we're trying this new setup, I might exit out of the PowerPoint from time to time just so I can double check that we don't have any questions, okay? But otherwise, for now, I'm going to keep going. And then at the end of comma uses, before we move on to parts of speech, I'll stop and field some questions, guys. Okay, between two dependent clauses. All right, this is one of the most common. Okay, so the dreaded comma splice. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. Your teachers have written comma splice on your homeworks or something you've handed in. Okay, a comma splice quite simply means you've incorrectly separated two sentences with a comma. Okay. The issue is, or when this typically happens, okay, is if we have either a simplistic sentence, like our first example here, Sarah went to the library. It's a full sentence, but it's simple, okay? So, and then the other issue, right, comma splices most commonly occur when the second dependent clause is related to the first one, okay? So if we look at this example, Sarah went to the library, the first dependent clause is brief, and then she purchased a brand new grammar book while she was there. So this fix, right, there are multiple options to fix a comma splice. We can, of course, do the classic, put a period. The other option, right, is to put a comma with the coordinating conjunction, right, a comma and, a comma but, right? Or, of course, guys, you could use a semicolon wherever you use a period, okay? So for this, the first example with the library, this might be an excellent place to use a semicolon because the clauses are very closely related, right? Or the second option with the coordinating conjunction and. Okay, in our next example, Fernando drove to the store today. Patrick walked. Okay, so right now we have the comma after today. Right, and this is one of the most common errors, is when you have such a brief independent clause. So that should say between two independent clauses up there, guys, not dependent. When one of the clauses is very brief, Patrick walked, okay? While it doesn't sound like it, this is a full sentence that has a subject and a verb. Okay, so since they're both about mode of transportation, once again, okay, this is a great space to use a semicolon. You could use a period, okay, or you can always use a coordinating conjunction, a comma plus a coordinating conjunction. So it's really important to remember, guys, all those grammar pieces are equivalent, a period, a semicolon, a comma, followed by a coordinating conjunction. Okay, so all of these are acceptable fixes for the comma splice. I also just want you to take a note of the types of sentences, the types of independent clauses that we might make that will lead to a comma splice, like brief sentences, Patrick walked, okay? Or when they're really closely linked and it feels like they're all part of one idea. Okay, if grammatically there are two independent clauses, we have to find a way to either alter one of the clauses to make them dependent or properly punctuate them. Okay. And then last but not least, guys, missing commas when you're using appositives. Okay, so this, for example, guys, is similar to punctuating non-essential clauses, okay, except with appositives, the information is essential, okay. So the new head of finance, Mr. Marks, is going to introduce himself today, or in today's meeting, okay. If this didn't sound incorrect, that's totally understandable. This isn't quite a grammar error you can hear, right, but there needs to be a pause, okay, before Mr. Marks and after the new head of finance, right? And then we're naming him the positive. Mr. Marks is going to introduce himself in today's meeting. Okay, so I really want to point out here, guys, because sometimes when we learn non-essential clauses, we start thinking anything in between two commas is non-essential, okay? This is not the case. So this is an appositive. It's punctuated similarly to a non-essential clause in that, right, it has commas before and after it, right? But in this case, right, he's the subject of the sentence, okay? Right. The lead singer of the band, Misty, is my favorite member. Okay. Again, we need commas around the name. Okay. All right, guys. So I hope that going through these comma misuses, right, they helped solidify some of the stuff we went over last week. You really want to go over both sides of the coin. So not just when you should use commas, where they belong, where they should go, but when you should not, because more often than not, absolutely in my experience, students are far more likely to overuse this piece of punctuation. They're far more likely to add commas all over the place, okay, because either the sentences are long and complex, they feel like they belong, and also because over time, I think some students consider them like an aesthetic choice. Right? Maybe I'll add a comma here. Maybe that would visually look good or it would sound good, okay? And I want to kind of erase that type of thinking and replace it with definitive rules. So you should never ask, would a comma sound good here? You know, do I want to put a comma because this feels long? Okay, what you want to ask is, does a comma grammatically belong or not? Okay, so if you're writing up a paper and you're wondering where does this comma belong, or you're thinking about adding one but you're not sure why, you don't have a definitive reason. You have a long sentence, you just want to put a comma in it, okay, to create some kind of visual breakup. Try to stop yourself from doing that. Go ahead and Google, revisit some of these PowerPoints, guys, and see, right, what the rules are. Should I use a comma or not? It is not an aesthetic choice. All right, guys, so if we don't have any questions about commas, I'm going to just check here, right? So I don't see anything in the comments yet. I'm going to come out of here for a second, guys, just so I can check over here. Okay. And on my side, it's saying we're not able to connect to the chat. We can't connect right now. So this is likely why we're not fielding questions, or we don't have any yet. Please, guys, feel free to email questions if you have them afterwards, right? We can field them at Prepped and Polished, and I can respond, right? So if you have specific questions about comma misuses, about any of the parts of speech we go over in today's lecture, please just send them over to Prepped and Polished, and then you'll get a response from me in the next couple of days, right, explaining your question, okay? I absolutely want you to have clarity on this stuff, right? All right, guys, so we're going to go through each of the parts of speech today. Okay, and I know we're going to start off slow with some of the classics with verbs, nouns, and adjectives, but we will move into more complex, more obscure, lesser known parts of speech. So do hold on if this part seems a little bit basic, okay, because we are going to be moving on to those kind of trickier, lesser known parts of speech, okay. So starting with our verbs, okay, so every sentence requires a verb. Okay, and a verb is used to describe an action, an occurrence, or a mode of being, okay, and it forms the main part of the predicate of a sentence, okay. In other words, guys, I know we think of them as action words, right, but there are other components, for example, mode of being, right, was tired, right, Jackie was tired. This isn't an action word, I'm not doing something, it's just describing a feeling, okay. So let's look at some examples. In our first sentence here, okay, these are pretty traditional, right, so these are action verbs. The pirates forced their way onto the enemy ship, fought the crew for nearly 3 hours, and stole everything aboard before sailing away. Okay, so here, guys, forced, fought, and stole are our verbs. Okay, and then just always important to remember that they have to agree. So since the pirates is plural, all our verbs have to be plural. Okay, and since the first verb is in the past tense, okay, all the verbs have to remain in the past tense. So we can't have the pirates force their way onto the enemy ship, fight the crew for nearly 3 hours, and steal everything, right? So we need to keep everything in the past tense if we start in the past tense. Let's look at another example. Ever since she was little, Eleanor had been fascinated by books and particularly loved reading before bed, okay? So in these examples, as opposed to action words, guys, these describe a mode or a time. So ever since she was little, okay? And then to be is our second verb, had been fascinated, okay? And then finally our third verb, loved, right? So she loved reading, okay? Here, guys, reading is functioning as a gerund. We're going to talk about that in just a second, okay? Whenever we go on a hike, we make sure to bring a compass in case we get lost and need to find our way back, okay? So look how many verbs are in this sentence, okay? So when you are using a lot of verbs, a lot of action words, make sure that you are double checking all their tenses, okay, as well as the number, making sure, okay, that they're all in agreement. All right, so now we're going to talk quickly about gerunds, what they are, what do they do? Okay. So a gerund is not on its own a part of speech, okay, but this is formed from a verb, so a gerund is derived from a verb, but it functions as a noun, like that example we just saw. When this is the case, okay, so when a verb is used like a gerund, it will always end with ing. Okay, so let's look at some examples of this. Okay, I never gave reading enough of a chance. Okay, in this sentence, although to read is a verb, to give is the sentence's verb. Okay, reading here is functioning as a noun, right? It's the sentence's object instead of, okay, the verb, right? So let's look at a couple more examples where, again, we have a verb, but it's used as a gerund. It's functioning as a noun within the sentence. Filing papers can give you a paper cut, okay? So the filing, this verb here is used as a gerund, okay? They're the thing, the noun that can give you a paper cut, okay? Last week, I made studying my priority. Made is the verb in the sentence, okay? Studying is then the object, okay? All right, guys, so that's it for verbs. This should be fairly straightforward. And if you didn't know about gerunds and how they function, now you do, okay? So now we're going to move on to adjectives, right? So these, of course, are our modifying words. Adjectives are used to describe or modify other nouns, right? So they make them more specific, they tell you details about them, they explain something about them, okay? So guys, I thought it would be fun if we want to look at what is the value of adjectives. How important are they, right? How much can they enhance writing? I want to look at an excerpt from Harry Potter. If you haven't read, I highly recommend, okay? And I have removed every piece of descriptive text, right, from the excerpt. So I'm going to go back and read it with the adjectives after, so you can see the massive difference it makes in description, in world building here, and in the quality, complexity, the excitement level of the writing. Okay, so let's look at this excerpt without adjectives. The door swung open. A witch stood there. She had a face, and Harry's thought was that this was not someone to cross. The first years, Professor McGonagall, said Hagrid. Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here. She pulled the door. The entrance hall was big. The walls were lit with torches, the ceiling was high, and a staircase facing them led to the upper floors. The dining hall was lit by candles, which were in mid-air over 4 tables. These tables were laid with plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another table where the teachers were sitting. Okay, so if you guys have read Harry Potter, this should have sounded woefully dry and boring. Okay, so now we're going to look at the same excerpt from Harry Potter with the modifiers, with the adjectives and descriptive words in there, and look at the kind of difference it makes. Okay, the door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robe stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. The first years, Professor McGonagall, said Hagrid. Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here. She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big, you could have fitted the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches, like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing nouns. Okay, unlike proper nouns. So these should be defined as opposites, right? So where generic nouns do not name a specific person, place, or thing, proper nouns do, right? So I use the same examples, guys, instead of car, Mercedes. Okay, so you can see the difference between common and proper. For cereal, we have Captain Crunch, performer, Lady Gaga, soda, Mountain Dew for the proper noun, subject, history, and then country and France. Okay, so it's important to remember one of the things that differentiates common and proper nouns, okay, is that proper nouns must be capitalized. Okay, and I want to quickly point out that common nouns can be capitalized, obviously at the start of a sentence, guys, but common nouns can be capitalized when they are attached to and a part of a proper noun, okay? So if you said, for example, you know, she's not in a good state of mind, we would not capitalize the noun state, okay? But if you were going to New York State, right, or for example, if it were the Rocky Mountains, right, you wouldn't capitalize mountains, right? If you used it alone, the mountains over there are beautiful. But if it's Rocky Mountains, mountains, the common noun, needs to be capitalized because it's part of a proper noun. Okay, and then guys, just a quick tip to remember, right? Each of the students, okay, has to pack their own lunch. So there is replacing students. We don't repeat it. But if they forget it, okay, so we have it instead of lunch. They, instead of the students, can always purchase one at the museum's cafe, okay, and one replacing lunch there. So the main reason we use pronouns are so we don't have to continually repeat a subject over and over, okay? If we did, it would become very repetitive and make the writing a little bit boring, okay? So it's the key for these, utilizing this part of speech in your own writing. is when you make a replacement, you have to make sure the pronoun you put in agrees with the noun it's replacing, okay? So, and the first example, I don't know how, if this said he came up with that idea, right? This would be an improper pronoun to plug in for the parents, right, which is plural, okay? So that's the rule to remember. A pronoun must agree with the antecedent it's replacing. Okay, so let's look at this example here, guys, because it typically does not sound wrong, and especially when we're making kind of generalized statements, okay? If a person wants to lose weight, I recommend they eat healthy and exercise regularly. So when I read that, it very likely did not sound wrong, okay? That's in part because if we were in spoken English, it would likely be accepted. No one would correct you for saying that, okay? But if we look at the subject, a person, right? Okay, they cannot function as a pronoun for a person, okay? Because they is a plural pronoun and a person is a singular subject, okay? So here's your options. You have a couple options to fix it, guys, but if the antecedent is a person, right, you could say he/she. So if a person wants to lose weight, I recommend he eats healthy and exercises regularly. You could put he/she, right? If you only use a single gender, so if you say I recommend he eats healthy and exercises regularly, then when you plug in for a singular person later on, you want to keep that consistent, okay? Or the same for if you do he/she. Right, the other thing I want to note is when we make this shift, you have to change the verbs as well. So in the first example, I recommend they eat, okay? It's a person, so now the verbs are incorrect. The verbs were for a plural subject, so it needs to be he eats and exercises. All right, guys, so we're going to look at a couple types of pronouns quickly. It is not going to be a comprehensive list, but these are going to be likely some of the most common ones, okay? So personal pronouns, right? These are where we get first person, second person, and third person, right? These are the pronouns that refer to the person or people, right? Speaking or writing, that's the first person, right? So I enjoy, blah, blah, blah. I'm the author of that. The person or people being spoken to, right? You all need to make sure you hand in your assignment next week, okay? That's second person, or other people or things. This would be third person, okay? So don't forget, guys, like nouns, personal pronouns can function as either the subject or object of a verb, okay? All right, guys, so we're going to use this chart just so you get a visual understanding, okay, of subject pronouns, object pronouns. So those are going to be the two examples I talked about, that they can either function as the subject or object of a sentence, okay, or a statement. And then possessive adjectives, okay, so these guys are going to function as pronouns as well. So let's look at a couple examples of these. She was known for her outgoing personality, okay? So here we have the subject pronoun is she, okay? But we also have the object pronoun, her outgoing personality, okay? The NFL player proposed to her on her birthday, okay? So guys, I know that these standing alone sound awkward. That's why they require an antecedent. We would have named her beforehand, okay? We had always wanted a pet of our own, okay? So we is functioning as the subject pronoun and our as a possessive adjective. Okay, guys, so the key to remember with pronouns is when you replace a noun with them, we have to be absolutely sure that they agree in number. So if you are plugging in for a singular noun, the pronoun must be singular. Okay, if you're plugging in for a plural, the pronoun has to be plural. All right, so next let's look at adverbs, right, guys? So these are words that modify or describe a verb, okay? Or you often hear they end in ly, okay? So typically they do, this is true, right? However, adverbs can also be used to describe adjectives, so they can modify other adjectives, other adverbs, right? Or even an entire sentence, okay? So we'll look at an example of each of those. Okay. So the elections are coming soon, right? So this is modifying, okay, coming, right? That the to be, they are coming, okay? So they're not just coming, they're coming soon. It's altered that. They only shop locally, okay? So to shop has been altered, right? Not just shop in general, but shop locally. Okay. They are not just married, but happily married, describing that verb. Okay. The roads are extremely steep. Okay, so this one, guys, might just look like an adjective. Why is this an adverb if we are wondering? Okay, so that is because the word extremely, right, while of course it is modifying the roads, it's actually modifying how they are, right, the word to be. So the roads are extremely steep, right? So that's being modified because it could just say the roads are steep. He stopped by briefly to say hello. Okay, so stopped is modified by briefly. And then calls, in the last example, my daughter calls me regularly. That's being modified by the adverb regularly. Okay, so anything talking about the frequency with which you do something or describing, okay, these are going to be adverbs. All right, now let's just look at quick examples where the entire sentence has been modified by the adverb. Right? So hopefully, okay, so these guys are functioning as introductory clauses. They need a comma after them, and then they are modifying everything that comes after it. Hopefully, my mom will be here soon with the ingredients and we can start cooking dinner, okay? So that sentence can stand alone. My mom will be here soon with the ingredients and we can start cooking dinner, okay? And the adverb hopefully modifies the entire sentence, okay? Same with the example below. Unfortunately, there are times when violence is the only way in which justice can be secured, okay? So again, we have independent clause that's being modified by the adverb unfortunately. All right, guys, for our next part of speech, prepositions. Right? We've talked about these briefly in previous lectures, okay? But these guys are the words that relate and link other words and phrases, okay? They show direction, location, time, or they can introduce an object. Okay, so we're going to look at an example of each of these. Okay. So first, an example showing direction. Okay, where is it going? The plane is headed to Florida. Okay, so our preposition there is to, and it's telling us in what direction. Location, the cat is hiding underneath the couch. Okay, so it's not just hiding, but it tells us where in relation to the couch. Okay. She should be arriving in about 15 minutes. Okay, so the preposition in telling us when. This is our time example. And then last but not least, an example where the preposition introduces an object. Okay. So Santa brought a huge red bag full of presents. Then our preposition is of. Okay. So it's important to remember, guys, because sometimes we can mix them up, right? That a preposition, that's what the word is based on, okay, before the position, right, of the object it relates to. Okay, in other words, a preposition, a preposition, has to come before the object it relates to. Okay, so if we look at our examples, to comes before Florida, underneath comes before the object, the couch, in before 15 minutes, and then of relating to presents. Okay, so if it doesn't have an object, right? If it doesn't, okay, then it's an adverb, right? So all prepositions have objects, unlike adverbs, which do not. Right, guys? Conjunctions, right? So this is our linking word. They are used to connect clauses or sentences, right? Or coordinate words within the same clause. So don't forget, guys, those conjunctions are also what we use with commas to build proper punctuation to separate two independent clauses. Okay. We will look at examples of those as well. Right. So let's look at a few conjunctions. Ben had always wanted a dog, but his parents were allergic to dogs and could not have one inside their home. Right, a sentence starting with because, right, and know that we think it can, but let's look at some examples, kind of demystify a few of these myths. There are very few rules in English like that. You can never start a sentence with that are definitive. Okay. Because it rained yesterday, the ceremony was held indoors. Okay. So this is linking the phrase, it rained yesterday, to the fact that the ceremony was held indoors. Okay. After her friends left that evening, Megan went to bed despite wanting to stay up and finish her homework. Okay. So here we have more than one conjunction, right? These can also function like transition words. Okay, guys. So don't forget that if we use a coordinating conjunction after a comma, so a comma followed by a fanboy, those are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Okay, most common being a comma and, right? This is grammatically equivalent to a period or a semicolon. Okay, so it's an acceptable way to separate two independent clauses, like in example 1. Ben had always wanted a dog. His parents were allergic and could not have one inside their home, right? These are both full sentences. Okay, and we linked them with the comma and the coordinating conjunction, but. All right, guys, we're almost through, and we're getting to some of those more obscure parts of speech now, including interjections, right? So an interjection, this is a word or phrase that's grammatically independent from the rest of the text. In other words, it's always non-essential, and it expresses feelings instead of meaning. In other words, it's not going to be content, but maybe an aside, something that someone sighs under their breath, or something they state. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples of interjections. Okay. Oh, what a beautiful house. Okay, so our interjection here is oh. All of them are italicized, guys. Okay, so what a beautiful house is the statement. Okay, and the interjection oh, this emphasizes the feeling, right, that they really like the house. Uh-oh, this looks bad. Okay, so our interjection here is uh-oh. Right? Well, it's time to say goodnight. Okay, so all of these, the text stands alone, right? It's time to say goodnight. Okay, does not require an interjection. Right? So always not essential. Actually, it's not my dog. Okay, so the expressing that kind of pause, maybe a period of confusion or thought, okay, is our interjection. Shoot, I thought I'd fix that. Okay, so this one, shoot, expressing the frustration. And then last, I can't believe I lost my key. Ugh, okay, so the sigh, ugh, after, that's our interjection. Okay, so it's likely that unless you're doing creative writing, you're not going to use these as often as the other parts of speech we looked at today. Okay, and then of course, let's throw in one from Harry Potter. Alas, earwax, right? Poor Dumbledore, he always gets the earwax flavor or a bad flavor, right? When he has those every flavored thoughts beans, okay? So interjections, okay, as in the example from an actual text, are typically used in creative writing to show characters' emotions, feelings, and responses. All right, determiners, okay? Determiners are also, guys, just definite articles. We can interchange this vocabulary, right? Is technically a modifying word, which determines the kind of reference a noun or noun group has. Okay, so definite articles should likely sound familiar. Words like an, the, and every. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples of statements with determiners in them. Right? I ate the chocolate for dessert, right? So the, okay, indicating there's just one of them and it's the one. A dog makes a good pet. Okay, so the articles there, determiners right, indicating it's singular. Right? We went to the best restaurant in town. Okay. Right, so this is modifying it as a singular. It stands alone as opposed to, guys, one of the best restaurants in town. Okay, can I have an apple? Right. And don't forget, guys, when using a or an, right, we want to use an, that article, before nouns that start with vowels. Okay, so can I have a horse? Can I have an apple? Okay, and then we're also going to look at demonstratives, right? Demonstrative pronouns can also be used as determiners. Okay, so earlier I said we would address these, that, and those, right? Those kind of pronouns. So we will do that now. Okay, and look at the four demonstratives in English. These cookies are absolutely delicious. This homework assignment is way too long. That movie has been playing in the theater for a few weeks now. And those shoes look terrible with those pants. Okay, so these demonstrative pronouns are, okay, describing, modifying, right? Not just cookies, but these cookies, the specific ones. Okay. All right, guys, so before we head out today, I wanted to do a brief recap, kind of a quick review. I know that I can't see the chat right now, but at least you can answer out at home. So I'm going to put out an independent clause, underline one of the parts of speech in it, and I'd like you guys to try to name them at home. Okay, and then of course we'll show the answers. So you have to believe in yourself if you ever expect to be successful at something. Okay, so the phrase yourself, or this word here, what part of speech is it? Okay. Okay, guys, so this is a pronoun. Okay, and more specifically, a personal pronoun, right? That one of those early ones we looked at. We left for the airport just before 6 in the morning. Okay, so the word left, right? This is the sentence's action word, explains what they're doing. Indeed, it's our verb. Okay. Now, our next example, she went to the store to buy a few things before arriving at the party. We have two underlined words in this statement, which is to, okay, which are to and before. Okay. So she went to the store, showing location, to buy a few things before arriving at the party, showing timing. Okay, these words are prepositions. Right, guys, we had a breakfast at a cafe near the rail station. Okay, so breakfast, right? This is a noun, guys, and it is also, right, the object. The man wasn't strong enough to carry his overweight dog, the poor dog. Okay, so here, guys, the word we have underlined is overweight. It is describing or modifying the dog. So it's an adjective. Our next example, I helped him carry it, right? This is going with the sentence before, I helped him carry the overweight dog, right? This is plugging in for it. It's replacing the word dog. So it is a pronoun. All right, guys, the weather was extremely cold. Okay, so if you have the urge to select adjective, that's okay, right? It is modifying and describing, okay, but it's the word extremely is modifying was, okay? So this here is an adverb as opposed to an adjective. All right, my friend said, oh, what cold weather. Okay, and we have O underline, that little statement, she's aghast. Okay, this is an interjection. Okay, and then last but not least, I wanted to go to the dance, but I was grounded for skipping class. Okay, and we have a comma followed by, right, a coordinating conjunction. The but is a conjunction. All right, guys, so I hope you found it really helpful to go through these parts of speech and definitively know when they are, what they are, right, and how they function, what they do. That way, when we go over some of the more complex grammar rules later on, I'll be able to name this vocabulary and everyone will be able to keep up. The other thing is I want you to note a lot of the vocabulary sounds fancy, right, a preposition, okay, but it's based on something very simplistic. A preposition comes before the thing it modifies, so it's a preposition. Okay. So as always, guys, if you are looking for one-on-one help, individualized tutoring, please feel free to contact us. Okay, preppedandpolished.com, or you can give us a call. Okay. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining us. I really hope that this is beneficial for you guys, that you can start implementing some of the things we learned, some of the things we go over in your own writing. So I will see you all next week, same time, same place, and we will go over more grammar rules together. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week.